Trade agreement with the U.S. at least appears closer to becoming a reality. Just last hour, the Prime Minister posted this on social media. Congratulations, Minister LeBlanc and Ambassador Greer, for the significant progress in the Canada-U.S. trade negotiations. Canada entered these discussions with the best overall trade terms. We are now moving towards an agreement that reinforces that Canadian advantage, including by securing the best terms in each of Canada's most important strategic sectors and providing greater certainty about our future trading relationship. Now, in a rare moment, just over an hour ago, the two men leading the way in those talks appeared together before the cameras after meeting in Washington. Dominic LeBlanc and Jamieson Greer spoke to reporters assembled there.
We're very happy with where we ended up. We worked together across agencies, the American government, the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury, myself, the Chief of Staff, with the President, who had a number of phone calls with the Prime Minister. We're looking at documentation at this point. I have responsibilities to brief Congress on what documents might look like, speaking with American stakeholders, businesses, unions, etc. We feel confident that we've reached an agreement that will not only continue to protect American workers, American jobs, American supply chains, but really strengthen the North American economy and create a situation where North America will continue to be an energy powerhouse, a manufacturing powerhouse, and align on important things like economic security and digital security. So while we certainly, I think, have eliminated some of the irritants that we've had over the past year, we also are taking a strong foot forward on the next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci, Jamieson.
Bonne journée.
Merci. À bientôt.
Monsieur LeBlanc, est-ce que vous voulez faire des concessions sur la gestion d'offres? Est-ce que, par exemple, les quotas seront revus? Est-ce qu'il y a des quotas qui sont octroyés aux agriculteurs américains à suite de cette entente?
Moi, je pense que c'est important
Well, I think it's important to state that the supply management system remains entirely intact. It was important to protect the regime we have in Canada, supply management, and that will obviously be protected in the documents that we are now finalizing. But I am sure that dairy producers and the agricultural sector will be well protected. We maintained our hard line on protecting supply management, and I'm very confident.
I am very confident in these discussions, and as we finalize the final text, as Ambassador Greer said, the Prime Minister was very clear. We needed to protect supply management. We needed to ensure that the supply management regime remained entirely intact, and I'm confident that that's the case.
So that's where things stand right now. Fairly vague statements. He did not clarify in follow-up questions what exactly he meant, particularly about supply management. But we will have extensive coverage for you throughout the day here from our CBC teams across the country and south of the border. The CBC's Catherine Tunney is parsing the messaging from U.S. officials in the U.S. Capitol in D.C. And then here at home, our Olivia Stefanovic is gathering reaction from Canadian leaders. So let's start off with Catherine in Washington. Kat, let's go deeper into the messaging from the president and his administration. What do we know about the terms of this agreement and what might be covered?
Well, we have to come out of the gate saying we don't see signatures on a deal yet. We don't know what has been agreed to. And most of what we're hearing is from U.S. President Donald Trump. With all those caveats, though, it does feel like there has been some important movement on this file. We saw there two officials standing shoulder to shoulder, talking optimistically about a North American trade, even smiling, suggesting some kind of agreement is within sight. Definitely not the tone that we've been used to over the past year. And that meeting this morning between Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer came just hours after Trump announced he was pausing his promised 50% tariffs on Canadian goods, which were scheduled to kick in at midnight. Now, while speaking about his helipad today, Trump was asked about this so-called deal and described it in these terms.
You got to give something, and we're doing certain things. We're paying a high number. We're reducing it a little bit. It's good for everybody. But our farmers are going to be thrilled. Our manufacturers are going to be thrilled. And basically, we have no tariffs going into Canada anymore. Canada was charging us tremendous tariffs. We no longer have any tariffs. So subject to the finalization of documents, we have a deal with Canada. And I think it's a very good deal for both parties. It's great for our farmers. Our farmers will no longer be held up because they were being hurt very badly by Canada.
You know, interesting to note his talk of farmers being happy. Not sure dairy farmers in Canada will be thrilled to hear that, given, the president's issues with Canada's supply-managed dairy sector and ongoing U.S. concerns about how the Canadian government allocates quotas for tariff-free imports of dairy products. Minister LeBlanc had this to say about the supply management system.
I am very confident in these discussions, and as we finalize the final text, as Ambassador Greer said, the Prime Minister was very clear. We needed to protect supply management. We needed to ensure that the supply management regime remained entirely intact, and I'm confident that that's the case.
So, we're waiting to see clarification between those comments. What, if anything, has been tweaked? Greer also spoke about economic security and digital alignment. We are short on details about what that looks like on paper. And, Trump, in a social media post last night, suggested Keystone XL could be, quote, awoken from the grave as part of an agreement. That, of course, is that pipeline project the Biden administration canceled, which would have moved oil from Alberta to U.S. refineries. Again, not hearing from the Canada side about what exactly has been negotiated. And we don't know more about what this means for other hard-hit Canadian industries, steel, lumber, and whether provinces are willing to restock shelves with American booze. So, today there is some temporary relief, of course, for those manufacturers who were, mere hours away from hefty tariffs. And there does seem to be a shift in tone, but still a lot of question marks hanging over, this very important file.
Adding to that shift in tone, Kat, I just want to add on to your reporting a statement out just as you started talking, of course, because that's the way live reporting always tends to go, from U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who writes, "I welcome the significant progress made between the United States and Canada towards a deal, which is subject to finalization and signing. President Trump's leadership and determination have driven these negotiations, and I look forward to the release of further specifics, don't we all? This news demonstrates what can be accomplished through focused, constructive engagement and a shared commitment to economic prosperity. We appreciate the efforts of our Canadian partners in making this possible." So another statement basically saying congratulations, but stopping short of details, obviously. Kat, where do things go from here?
Yeah, well, Mark, it sounds like, there's going to be a lot of conversations in a short timeline. Greer mentioned having to brief Congress, U.S. unions, and lawmakers. Similar discussions would be happening, I'd imagine, on the Canadian side, including with premiers, and all before Saturday. And, with a president, of course, who's notorious for making, last-minute demands. And looking further down the line, I think there are still questions about what this could mean for the broader trade deal, those talks. Does this clear a logjam in CUSMA talks, or are more blockades ahead? And, of course, what does Mexico, the other key player here, make of all of this as well? So even if a tariff deal is reached in the coming days, clearly the saga is far from over.
Certainly is or is not. CBC's Catherine Tunney in Washington. Thank you. Turning now to the reaction here in Canada, CBC's Olivia Stefanovich following that angle for us from Ottawa. Olivia, the Prime Minister issuing that statement last hour that Trump says there's a deal. Carney not really using such precise wording. Take us through how the Canadian government is characterizing these negotiations.
Yeah, so in the Prime Minister's initial statement after the U.S. President Donald Trump declared on Truth Social last night, just before the tariff deadline, that the U.S. has a deal with Canada, Mark Carney, in his initial statement, did not mention the word deal or agreement, which is notable. Instead, the Prime Minister's initial statement described what's happened here as substantial progress, and that important work is still has to be made. But in the latest statement from Carney, which we received today, that's up on your screen now, Carney does describe this as an agreement, at least a tentative one, with the U.S. In his statement, Carney congratulates both the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, Dominic LeBlanc, and Ambassador Greer, the U.S. trade representative, who's known as Jamieson Greer, for their significant progress in these talks, and then goes on to say, and I'll just read the full statement here, the rest of it, Canada entered these discussions with the best overall trade terms. We are now moving towards an agreement that reinforces that Canadian advantage, including by securing the best terms in each of Canada's most important strategic sectors and providing greater certainty about our future trading relationship. Now, a Canadian source tells CBC News, Mark, that the federal government has been able to reduce sectoral tariffs. The question is, by how much? We know that the Canadian side has been urging the Americans to to lower those tariffs that exist on auto, steel, aluminum, and forestry products throughout this whole the past year since they've been in place, especially within the last few weeks after the president imposed this tariff deadline on Canada. Now we know from a Canadian source that these tariffs, which are as high as 50% for some sectors, between 25 and 50%, they have been lowered according to this Canadian source. Of course, we're still waiting for the details on how much they've been lowered and what each sector is going to be tariffed by. We're also hearing from the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, Dominic LeBlanc's office, that the minister is in fact now heading back to Canada. He's going to arrive in Ottawa today to meet with the Prime Minister and continue to take meetings to finalize this agreement with the U.S.
I'd assume he'd obviously be in those meetings with the various provincial and territorial premiers as well to go over the finer points of this proposed deal. Now, Olivia, what other reaction have we heard thus far?
Well, we are hearing from opposition leaders. Let's start with the leader of the official opposition, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Now, it's important to note that none of the opposition leaders have been briefed on the details of this agreement. And there is supposed to be a call with premiers, between the premiers and the federal government at some point today. But so far, the opposition leaders, they're just getting information from what's really in the news right now. And we don't have a lot of the fine details at this time. What Poilievre is saying is that he's happy that there is a deal. A deal is better than no deal in his view, but he wants to see the fine print, specifically what's happened to sectoral tariffs. He says he wants to see them completely eliminated, and he says he wants to see if this deal is better than the one that already exists with the U.S., because he notes that Carney did promise a better deal with the United States. Have a listen.
We had basically no tariffs on goods coming from Canada to the United States. So a better deal would at least have to start with that. We need zero tariffs on aluminum, steel, autos, lumber, and a full exemption to Buy America. Now, that's, in fairness, a lot of the things I just described are things that were agreed to by President Trump in the previous CUSMA agreement. And or achieved by earlier conservative governments like Prime Minister Harper. So Mr. Carney has set that bar for himself. We want him to keep his promise and get an even better deal for Canada than we had before. And Conservatives are willing to do anything we can to help him keep that promise.
So again, the federal government is expected to brief the premiers on the trade negotiations with the U.S. at some point today. We're also hearing from the leader of the Bloc Québécois, Yves-François Blanchet, who is raising concerns about what might be happening here with the dairy sector. We've heard from the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, Dominic LeBlanc, that supply management remains entirely intact, but this is still a concern for Quebec, of course, in terms of what further concessions might have been made on dairy. And also what's happening with the American alcohol, because we understand that if there is a deal with the U.S., that premiers are getting ready to restock the shelves. And Blanchet really wants to make sure that Quebec makes that decision by itself, that it's not being forced to by the federal government. And he's calling for a briefing from the Prime Minister to party leaders in the House of Commons.
All right, the CBC's Olivia Stefanovic. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.